Welcome to the first episode of Lit versus Genre. My name is Steve,
And my name is Jeff.
and I am going to be taking the lit side of things. I am a graduate from Brooklyn College with my MFA in fiction writing. And Jeff, where did you um, go to school again?
I promise. I went to some schooling. I went to Brandon Sanderson's masterclass in Provo, Utah. I was honestly looking around for a great, genre program, and don't get me wrong, there are some out there. But the fact that Brandon Sanderson, one of the giants in the, fantasy and even some sci-fi genre these days, the fact that he teaches a class, I was lucky enough to get in. And that's where I went for a semester
Learning
and really enjoyed my experience.
learning from the master himself. That's the way to do
Exactly.
it.
Hey, listen, if I can do an apprenticeship, I am all about it.
You
And I
gotta
got
jump.
to.
It's very
Super
fantasy
sweet.
appropriate doing an apprenticeship.
Exactly. Exactly. So no, it was just what I wanted. Met some great people, great experience.
Right on. So our idea here is for this podcast is basically I am a complete and total fantasy noob. I have never read, I think, a complete epic fantasy book all the way through. I did try Lord of the Rings, I think, way back in fifth grade or something, and I think maybe made it through a chapter and a half, and then put it down. And so we wanted to jump in and experience, I think, like, am I right here, Jeff? The Mac Daddy, basically, of all epic fantasy novels.
I mean, I really think so. In terms of completed epic fantasy works, this is the big one. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's others out there, but of course, with the Song of Ice and Fire and not completed
Yeah, get
yet.
to work, George.
Um, Yeah, exactly. George Martin Rothfuss is huge, but his work isn't completed yet. Even the completion of this epic Wheel of Time is a story unto itself. The fact that Robert Jordan sadly couldn't complete it, passing away, and the fact that that mantle was taken up by Brandon Sanderson to wrap the series, that in and of itself is a very epic story. And so, yeah, no, it's huge, it's massive, it's amazing. But I'll let Steve share his thoughts first
Yeah,
on
that's
how this.
wild, man. Maybe it's just impossible for any one person to complete one of these. Maybe
I
that's gonna
mean,
happen with George R. R. Martin as well. Somebody's gonna have to step in. It's just too big for any one man.
well, he's refused. He has specifically said that. Maybe he's
It will
recanted on
die
this.
with him. Is that what he
Yeah,
said?
it will die with him. I think his way of ensuring completion was the HBO series, honestly. But
Right.
that's a whole other
Well, yeah,
story.
there you go. You could say he's already, giving it to other people to finish.
You,
That's really
I mean,
funny.
you could. You really could. You really could, honestly.
Okay, well let's talk about this monster right here. And I
Hmm.
I feel like this is a great baptism of fire by fire for me because like when I opened it up, I was like, "Oh whoa. There is not only just one prologue to this thing. There are actually two prologues to
My
this
goodness.
thing." And then I found out after reading, I don't know, maybe like 10 pages of this, you like screamed stop at me. And Jeff, why
I
did you
did.
do that?
I did passionately stream stuff. I just didn't realize that when you purchase it, they would have snuck that extra chapter in there. For those of you that don't know, in the 30th anniversary edition of Wheel of Time, there is this extra chapter and called Earlier Ravens, as you can see there, and
Who's
it's
Ravens?
it. There is so much to say about this. We we have agreed to do this chapter on its own at a separate time, not too far away because it does happen well at the beginning of the book. But the reason that I was telling Steve to stop is because the way this book has been published for decades is to begin with the prologue, the regular prologue, then into chapter one with Rand. Now there. Again, there's so much to say about this earlier chapter. I'm gonna stop myself from saying it more. Other than
Is it called
it's to
earlier or
me.
is it called Ravens? That's my first question.
Yeah, Raven. So here's what I would say. Like, I mean, I just wanted to make sure that Steve's baptism, Steve's trial by fire was the original unedited version for him to get that original experience first, and we can talk about the good, the bad of this earlier chapter the next time around. So that I will say that is my first concern. Just get him to experience it like so many people had experienced it, and then we can discuss this other one.
No, man, I got to tell you, it was a total relief because at least the first few pages of this is just all about sheep shearing, and like that's it. That's what's happening. A girl's carrying around a bucket, and they're shearing sheep, and like that's. I was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be struggle. This is gonna be a haul, but you.
I promise I will have reactions to that next
Right on.
time.
But
I promise.
luckily, you
I
told
promise.
me I could jump ahead to this prologue. So, and
Yep.
this, you couldn't imagine a bigger 180 degree turn from that earlier thing to this prologue, which was like a
Talk to
fever
me.
dream of insanity. Like it was like going
Yeah.
from this
Yeah.
pastoral, oh look at this idyllic countryside lifestyle to what is even happening? What is even going on in this
Yep.
thing? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like tell me if this is true. I feel like this is a big thing with fantasy in the few times I have tried to dip in because I actually have tried to read a Sanderson. I tried to read his like first Mistborn, and I got pretty far into that actually. So I have
Oh,
read some of another fantasy book, and I feel like this idea of just being thrown in, having no idea what's going on or what's happening, is something that fantasy fans just have this bigger tolerance for than like I don't know any other reading fandom. I've read a lot more sci-fi too than I've read fantasy, and I gotta say I've like rarely felt as unmoored and like unsure of where I was or what the hell was going on than in this prologue.
it is definitely a standard. At least I would say for epic fantasy or more adult fantasy. I think with YA fantasy, there is more of a lead-in that happens. And obviously it depends, what type of fantasy we're talking about too. If we're discussing, urban fantasy, you've got that, or portal fantasy, you're beginning in a more mundane scenario. Yeah, and then that's the almost the reason for using that sort of story structure of urban fantasy or portal fantasy because you get to ease the reader in. Yeah, if you're doing alt-word fantasy, which is, this is just a whole new place, whole new world, yeah. There's a lot of instances where they're going to be throwing terms at you, they're going to be throwing words at you. And yeah, as a fantasy reader, that challenge is something that I really enjoy. And certain books definitely have steeper learning curves than others. Stephen Erickson, big epic fantasy writer, is sort of known for his very, very steep learning curves. And I would
Hmm.
say this one hits. I mean, this one is relatively steep, but I'd say it's not quite as much as that.
Well, we'll check it out because I think it's both in terms of how much like detail he's giving me or not giving me in this first chapter
Hmm.
that creates some of that feeling where I'm just like I am completely at sea here.
Right,
And then there's also things about terms, like well, we see it right here.
right.
I didn't highlight it, but there's elsewhere where I
Hmm.
highlighted where he's randomly capitalizing
Oh
words,
yeah.
which meaning like it's a thing. I get what he's saying. Like this is actually like a thing. I'm not talking about your voice,
Hmm.
normal
Hmm.
noun. I'm talking about voice, capital V. That means it's I don't know, a magical something or other
Right.
that maybe I'll learn about later. And there's another part where he just does it like 5 times in a row. I felt like I was reading like a Donald Trump tweet or something, where he just like randomly capitalizes whatever
Right.
words he
Right.
feels like it. So, but let's talk about so this highlighted. I have this. You're
Hmm.
immediately in this castle. Okay,
Right.
everybody's dead in the castle. I get that.
Oh yeah.
How they're dead though? There's like four different things that supposedly killed all those people. We have flashes of
Hmm.
lightning
Yep.
that flashed down every corridor, fires that had stalked
Hmm.
them, and then we have actually, I guess, like the walls themselves, like
Uh,
just sort of became alive and ate them, or they got sucked into like the walls somehow. And then I love
yeah.
this last sentence of this first paragraph, the mind twisting. And again, that's a
Hmm.
fantasy thing. Like, how is this mind twisting? Like, am I in a
Right.
mind? Am I like
Hmm.
that kind of almost made me go like, did this really happen? Because it's so kind
Yeah.
of wild and dreamlike, especially like the
Hmm.
walls
Right.
uh
Right.
flowing and kind of like sucking people into them. I imagine people kind of hanging like half in or half out of the walls or something.
Right. Right.
Is that even right? Like, am I even right in thinking that or visualizing that?
Yeah, no, I'd say that's absolutely right. This is I will say this is a trickier paragraph. But part of I think why, mystery readers read mysteries is because they want to find out, who did it, that type of thing.
Right.
And I think for a lot of fantasy readers, these are all little promises that, Jordan's making to us that eventually we're going to understand how it could be that stone would flow and trap people. We're going to understand what it means to have mind twisting. And so, as we're continuing to read this, we're trying to figure that out. We're trying to figure out, okay, how would a mind twisting lead to this? I will say what is trickier here, though, for sure, is that we've got this idea that there was all this destruction, but then other things were left untouched. And so that can seem like, how could that happen? How could there be fires that are burning people, but
Right.
the furniture's fine? And so I think this last sentence is meant to sort of explain that. But of course, it's not fully because we don't know what mind twisting is. It's this idea that, okay, so mind twisting is the thing that would just target people. Who knows what that is? But that explains why, chairs and stuff
Right, right. So
aren't on fire.
you think he like
Yeah,
added that last sentence in there to be like, wait, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, why some things the tapestries and shit would be fine,
right,
whereas
right,
other things are destroyed. So let me add this line in, but because
right.
I'm a crazy fantasy writer, I'm gonna put that word mind twisting in there, which is just gonna throw my
Right,
reader for a completely other loop. Uh,
right, right.
that's
And I
so
think it's
funny.
interesting that he wanted the furniture to be okay because, like, he didn't have to, right? Like, it could be that everything's destroyed.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
mm,
But he wanted this image of people dead, hanging out of
mm.
walls, half in, but furniture and tapestries are there because I think it does create this sort of eerier and more, as you said, kind of insanity into this read, which is
Mm.
that feel I think he's going for here.
Well, okay, so then that's the next level. So first we have this
Hmm.
level where I'm dealing with, okay, I don't really know how this happened or,
Right.
what caused this or what have you. Then we layer on he's like insane,
Hmm.
lose. And
Right.
lose doesn't seem to recognize that everything has gone to crap here.
Hmm.
Doesn't recognize. I do like this how like he steps over the woman's body and then says, "Where are you, my wife?" And that kind of like
Hmm.
immediately tells
Right.
the reader without telling them, "Oh, that's your wife that you just walked over and that she's dead."
Right.
And I love that dramatic irony there. How he did that without saying it outright. I
Hmm.
thought that was
Yeah.
great. But again, the fact that so now I don't know why he's crazy.
Right.
I don't know why he doesn't recognize all this nuttiness that's going on. And again, when it says mind twisting, again, it makes me question: did this really happen, or is this really happening?
Mm. It was
Sort
like
of
a
thing,
dream,
which
that
I
type of
don't think he
thing.
wants. Like, I think, like, and I had to go back and read it again to be perfectly honest. I went back and read the prologue again, and I did get
Right.
more of it the second time I read it through. But when you imagine like all the things that he's piling up here to like that you
Hmm.
have to navigate, I wonder if it's almost just meant to be read again. Like you're not so because he's given me like five different things that my brain has to handle in this short little prologue.
I do think again it's similar to the mystery style of storytelling where you can go back and read an earlier chapter of a mystery and see hints that the author was giving you about how things work. And with fantasy, at least, this style of very, leap into the deep end fantasy, that's definitely it. Because I mean, knowing what I know as a reader, someone who's read this series more than once, um, I know what this mind twisting is referring to.
Ah,
That actually ends up being kind of a central theme of the story.
right on.
Um, and it is actually even hinted later in this chapter. So I'll be interested to see if what
Oh,
connections you may or may not be seeing. But no, I think there is definitely something to be said about that coming back and reading a chapter like this once you know more about the story can be very satisfying because now you can start to understand what these things are. How much does that stop a new reader though? Of course,
right.
that's a question.
This is interesting. I think like it's like one of the things maybe that keeps fantasy a little bit more insular, but then
Mm,
is
mhm.
also then its charm, so that the people who love it
Right,
love that, you know.
right,
But then it
right.
also kind of keeps a certain segment of the population from going like, "What the heck is this? I cannot do this." But let's keep going here.
Sure,
All
sure.
right, what else do I have highlighted? Okay, we get this dude in black's name. So that was the other thing that struck me about this is like
Mhm.
it's so like kind of archetypal man in
Right.
black. I feel like the Lost dudes, you know, had totally read this and they're like, well, we're just gonna take that man in black thing. We're gonna, you know, and of course
Yeah.
that's not even original to Jordan necessarily. I mean, Man in Black is
Oh,
like
no.
all time
Yeah.
or whatever. But
Right. Right.
I like that he says I was once called
Mhm.
Alan Morin, and then like the third person narration just calls him Alan Morin for like the rest of the thing.
Right. Right.
So it's good enough for the third person narration, I guess. But
Yeah. I mean, you see him sneaking in that stuff, so then he can use that. And I do also think it speaks to that character, just the way he chooses to talk and talk about himself. So I mean, this line is definitely doing something just for the narrative. So we know who this person is, so his name can be used further on. But I do, and it is, as you said, incredibly archetypal. But I do too think that it's telling us a little bit about this, arrogant character, and it kind of makes sense for him to talk this way. And it gives a sense of the time period as well, this fantastical time period.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that name does for sure.
Oh yeah, the
So
name too as well. Just what the name is, right?
So then we get like down here in my next highlight, the first
Right,
big chunk of just like things you will maybe
right.
learn about later. And I'm just
Oh
gonna
yeah.
like rattle off a list of
Hmm.
like five of them that you have no
Right,
idea what those are.
right.
And then this is the first one, the next one, where he's like, pity for you, he mused. This is the first one
Mhm.
where I think I didn't even necessarily register the capitalization like the first time I read the line
Right, yeah,
because
yeah.
the words are so plain. Like,
Hmm.
I was like, oh, does one of Lou's sisters have healing
Right,
powers? But then I was like,
right.
wait, why is that capitalized? And I think it might have only been like on the second read that I was like, wait, why is that capitalized? Why is healing capitalized? And that's when I put it together in my brain that like, oh, there are these
Mhm.
things, voice, sisters, healing. They actually refer
Right,
to like very specific things, which again
right,
I maybe
right.
learn about later, I suppose.
I, I do want to say something about the chunk that you've highlighted there,
Hmm.
because this ties back to what I was mentioning before about sort of promises to the reader, in that, right, as you said, we're getting this indication like maybe we'll learn about these things later, but also it says to the reader, at least to me as a fantasy reader, that this author has spent the time to create a backstory. Like
Hmm.
there are things that have happened. There's a history to this world. There's a rich place that I'm going to. Many people read for escapism, and for that escapism to really happen, whether for whatever reason we're escaping or whatever we want out of that escapism, uh, you know, being able to fully be in it is what can make it a powerful escape. And so getting more specifics about the world and the history, that does something for a certain type of reader. Now, that's not what everybody does for, to generate escapism in their writing. We could normally see more about like sense or various, um, sounds that we're hearing to draw us into that escapism, right? But something that fantasy does a lot of, in addition to those sort of tactile or physical sensations, is it will like drop info about the history of the world. That this wasn't just a place that started on page one. This is a place that has existed for time. And that's why you want to keep reading about it so you can live in this place too, is the idea.
Right, right. And so like signaling that early
Right,
is a smart move because
right,
you know that's what people are in it for. So you drop this down. Now,
exactly.
how much do you think of that is often like BS'd, man, you know, because I can just sit here and
Oh
go,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Ring of Tamerlane and
Right.
nine rods of Dominion. That sounds good. Let's go with that. You know, do you think he like has all of those things like completely planned
Uh,
out, or do you think he's kind of dropping some stuff and then he figures it out later?
I mean, I think it can go either way. I mean, I will say there is a compendium to Robert Jordan's works that's got definitions for just so many things. It's massive. And I know that Robert Jordan does have a lot of notes to his work as well. I mean, that I'm going to avoid saying other things because they could be spoilers.
Right.
But what I would say is something Brandon talks about is the iceberg. And for anyone that's interested in Brandon's class, you can actually watch videos of his lectures. But the idea of the
You
iceberg
don't have to
is that
spend
the
money
reader
on it
only
like Jeff
sees.
did. You don't have to do that.
I'm sorry, what was that?
You don't have to spend money on it like Jeff did, is basically what you're
Right, exactly. You don't have to move to Utah
saying.
to
Yeah.
get this experience. But the idea is that the iceberg is readers only see the tip of the iceberg, and you want to be able to write it in such a way that they believe that the rest of the iceberg is indeed underneath that ocean, right? That we believe that yes, that he could at the drop of hat tell me the story of the nine rods of dominion, that he's got that, right? Um, and I will say that the way he writes in later chapters, even in chapter one, I think helps continue to establish that sort of history and belief that, yeah, he knows this world. He's got this. So whether or not, in the exact moment when he wrote the Nine Rods of Dominion, I don't know, but I think Robert Jordan does a very good job of convincing us
Right.
the rest of the iceberg is there for his
Right.
world
Right.
because he does reveal a lot of it. I mean, there are many books. These are thick books. There is a lot of that world that we do learn about.
I just like the idea of the sleight of hand that writers can
Yeah,
do of like giving just
for sure.
enough detail to sort of sell it, and then like
Right.
the rest of it, who knows, and that I'll make it
Hmm.
up when I need
Hmm.
to, right? Like
Right.
if I do need to make up more and put it in there, I'll put it in there. And of course you can always go back and edit, after this first
Sure.
book. I wonder
Exactly.
if he wrote this prologue later in the process of drafting the book, or
Mm-hmm.
if he starts off with this, or
Right.
yeah, it would be all very interesting to
Well, I
find that
think
out. But I like
no,
that
that's
idea. I'm going to
absolutely true.
signal to you that there's this whole world. I think of it
Right.
like as like it's backstory signaling as opposed to like
Yeah.
virtue
Hmm.
signaling. Your backstory
Right.
signaling, and he's doing that like
Right.
crazy here.
Well, and the thing that's so tricky, I mean, the reason a lot of people will bounce off certain fantasy works and the reason why some fantasy works become more popular than others is how well this is executed. How well can you name drop basically the various world terms that you've got, the various locations without overwhelming the reader? And I think one reason why this one works is because this, to a degree, matches Alon's character that, Alon is striking us as the type of person that likes to pontificate, that likes to, rub something in someone's face. And so there's a purpose for him listing all this. He's trying to show how far Luz has fallen. And so since there's a reason, a character reason for us to get this information, I think it can make it more palatable for someone else. I do understand that a non-fantasy reader might just gloss over these things, but part of me thinks that the reason why it works better is because there is some character voice behind that.
No, no, I'll buy that. I'll buy that.
Allow it a little bit. All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
I want to talk about this other line here at the end because this is
Let's do it.
another
Let's do
place
it.
where I'm like, I'm having trouble figuring out like
Yeah.
how literally I'm supposed to be taking things.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
and I was thinking about this and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of maybe a thing about a challenge maybe, and you'll have to tell me, having,
Mhm.
written a lot of fantasy,
Right.
when you're writing something literary, you're operating in the real world, so that when you
Right.
speak metaphorically, it's clear that you're speaking metaphorically. Like, you don't have
Yeah.
to oversell it. So, like, if I'm like in a real world situation and I say fire seared his marrow, everybody's going to be like, okay, yeah, he's, upset, or
Mhm.
maybe he's in pain, but it's not literally the marrow of his bones are on fire. And
Right.
here maybe the marrow of his bones are on fire, but like,
Yeah.
I guess but I'm also like, he'd be dead, right? So like, I'm also like having trouble at times knowing what I'm supposed to be completely buying as actually happening versus
Right.
what's metaphorical. And do you find that? Do you find that it's a little bit harder to speak in this kind of metaphorical register when you're writing fantasy?
I do. And even in, writing group, we'll pick out phrases like this where we're like, hey, I couldn't tell if this is actually happening or if it's just supposed to be like something. So yeah, no, it is absolutely tricky. Um,
Yeah,
to
because you
hazard
don't
a
want to say
guess.
like that's one of the things I
Yeah.
hate in writing. Like, I don't want to have to like really lean on
Right.
this simile. I don't want to say it was like
Yeah.
fire seared his marrow. I want to say fire seared his marrow, like, because it's just a better
Right.
sentence, right? And I'm sure that's why Jordan's doing it here. But it kind of opens
Mhm.
up that question when you're in a magical world to begin
Right.
with.
I think the reason why it was chosen here, and this is just, my best guess as a fantasy reader and writer, is that one, maybe, yeah, didn't want to have that phrase that wouldn't hit as strongly as this does. But two, because I think it actually can be, because it is set up. And then I actually want to talk with you about kind of this healing portion.
Hmm.
Because you mentioned that like with the sisters and the healing, you were like, what is this? And then Alan kind of gets in that fearing that he says like, but I fear that, Shaitan's healing is different from the sort So we start to get that like healing is like a power or a thing. And then he's like,
Right.
be healed. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
And
I
his
just wonder
version
like
is gonna
how much,
suck, is basically like you're
right.
realizing.
Exactly, exactly. So I think that sentence does a lot. And to anyone that knows better pronunciations, my apologies. I should have looked at the pronunciations of some of these terms before starting. But when it comes to the setup for this, I think it's very expertly done because you read about healing caps. You're like, what are you talking about? And then we learn about this other guy's healing that's going to be terrible, as you said. So we're learning that there's two different types of healing that exist. That's why healing is capitalized previously. It's setting up. We know that what's about to happen is going to be terrible. And then with Fire Seed Marrow, since it is this like evil healing, this terrible healing, maybe, yeah, fire is searing his marrow at the same time that he's being healed. That's how he's healed. So I think that's why this can be okay. It could actually be the fire is searing his marrow and acid is rushing through his veins because it is this terrible, twisted healing that is being used on him. But I
Yeah.
totally get what you're saying and why you brought that up.
But then
And it is
also you
tricky.
say healing and then you say fire seared his marrow, and you're like, well, that
Right? Yep.
seems to be the opposite of healing.
That's how we heal
Yeah.
around here.
I like it. I like it. All right.
So that's how Shaitan heals. um,
All right. So here we get towards the end of this, wrapping up this
right,
prologue. And I guess we should say, like, okay, everybody in his castle, I assume this is, his castle he was lord of. His wife and
right,
kids are all dead here,
right,
along with everybody else who was in this castle.
right.
If anybody hasn't read it, just to kind of recap, he like is walking through this. He seems unaware that his wife is even dead. Man in Black sort of materializes out of nowhere, and then is like, "Oh, you don't remember who you are. You don't realize any of this. I'm pissed about that because I want you to know that your whole family is dead because I want to like gloat over you." When we do that, so he does the healing thing, and then Luz realizes his wife is actually dead, and he's super upset, and so then something kind of bonkeroos happens again. So after all the bonkeroos stuff that's happened so
Right.
far, now he is going to, well, we have some good capitalized words here. He's going to
Yeah, we
travel
do. Yep.
and he's going to touch the light. Okay, which
Mhm.
again, I don't know what any of this even remotely could be referring to.
Right.
And not only that, but the traveling. So this is also my first read where I was like, I was just in a dream this whole time or something.
Right.
And I
Right.
don't, you'll have to tell me because suddenly he's like kind of flying over the land.
Hmm.
Um, Wait, let me. I want to talk about his whole guilt complex too,
Sure.
but
Sure.
like he's kind of flying over land. I guess I was back here, and
Yeah. No.
so like, is he literally? Does he literally just take off out of this castle and like fly somewhere? Or I kind of read it like, as he just went into like a different realm or something, or like
Hmm.
a dream space of some sort or something. And again, I know I'm gonna learn what traveled means later,
Right.
but like,
Right.
oh my goodness, it is really hard for me to let go of going, I just want to know what's happening right now. I want to know like what's actually occurring here because I really, really don't know what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do hear that. I mean, there's a reason why people, bounce off fantasy. And, even though Robert Jordan is one of the, epic fantasy writers, um, it is true that not everybody loves it, right? And it's not, whether it's a prologue or something else. And yeah, it can be moments like this that it can just feel like you're lost. I will say that again, having this conversation now, I keep talking about the mystery dimension. I don't think I consciously realized how much I enjoy having to piece things together,
Right.
having to see how things connect. So to me, Robert Jordan has hinted at how traveling works in the way that the Man in Black appears.
Okay.
So again, it is obviously tricky for me to take away my internal bias of knowledge that I know exactly what traveling is. But since we did see someone appear previously, like the Man in
Right.
Black was not there previously, then suddenly he is,
The air
and we do
rippled.
know that.
Let me read it. The
What was
air
that?
rippled, shimmered,
Yeah,
solidified into a man.
yeah,
Right on. Okay.
right. Right. So we've got that little hint. And part of it can be literally us going back and being like, wait a second, traveling. Did travel happen before? Let me go find that. And I realize that may not may not be how some people like to read. But that's very much what I got used to doing as a fantasy reader, reading from a very, very young age. And that's what I like about it. You're trying to figure stuff out. So I think we get some support for that in the sentence following traveled, because it doesn't say that he like is flying over land. It just suddenly says the land around him, as if he
Mm,
suddenly switched positions, much like that other guy just appeared. So now it says the land around him was flat and empty.
mm.
A river flowed nearby, straight and broad. He was alone, as alone a man could be. Now I realize, maybe if it had said he stood, and looked
Right,
around at
right,
the
right,
land
right,
around
right,
him,
right, right.
could be a little clearer because I can see now that exact phrase, like he stands there, isn't listed, so I understand why you're thinking of him like flying or flying over it. So yeah, I mean that I do get that that's a point where maybe just a little bit more description could have made. I realize this is blasphemy. Probably some people listening be like, oh, maybe Robert Jordan could have. But we are talking about a little bit of accessibility here,
Yeah.
and that is the idea. He is just
Yeah,
sort of standing there.
and then the sentence, the eyes pursued him through the endless caverns of his mind. And maybe then it's
Yeah.
the word traveled that he does use, and now I'm getting like, okay, traveled is just instantaneously teleporting from like one place to
Right.
another or whatever. I honestly
Mhm.
did not like even get that the first time,
Right.
and yeah, the land around him was flat and empty. It didn't say below him. For some reason, I felt like
Yeah.
that word traveled just set me up for movement, and then
Right.
pursued. The word pursued makes me think again. Again, that's metaphorical, I guess. The
Mm.
eyes
Oh, I hear
pursued
what you're
him.
saying. Pursued gives a sense of kind of motion, as if he's
Yeah,
traveling. Oh, and it's as if he's moving in his traveling, and as if the eyes are chasing him.
right. And I think
Yeah.
he's going through his mind. And when it says through his mind,
Right.
I think like, oh, we're in like some kind of mind or whatever. But this now I'm seeing again, and this is this metaphorical thing. This is
Right.
just more about his guilt here. This isn't
Exactly.
literal. This is like,
Right.
oh, and so, well, I want to talk about that because I want to talk about his guilt
Yeah.
because I that's thing number five
Sure.
that I feel like I don't understand about this chapter.
Sure.
But Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I'm kind of an idiot at times too when reading, but it's funny that I read this twice and just like I thought he like flew off somewhere or something like
Right.
that. As opposed to
I mean,
just teleported like away a
right.
certain place. Because I guess I'm also like not ready for him to have the same power as this man in black does, to be able
Mm,
to do
hmm
that. But
hmm
yeah, the capital letter, that's what you gotta like just land on. You gotta be ready for that capitalization, man. Because like if you're not
Yeah.
ready for that,
Yeah. Well,
whoa.
they're also setting you up because we've seen some magic here, right?
Hmm.
And then it says desperately reach for the true source, capitalize, and we're like, what's that,
Right.
right? And then we're like to tainted sight in, and we're like, okay, what is that? And then he traveled. Okay, what's that, right? But the travel, we can look back a little bit, and then later on this same page, we do get a definition of what the true source is. So again, there can be a lot of moments where we're like, oh, now I get it. Now I get what happened 3 paragraphs ago. Now I get what happened 2 pages ago. Like that type of thing. And it's kind of this discovery of the world and the mechanics and how things work.
I like how
And yeah,
you
I mean,
say
there
like we get a
there's an
def
enjoyment to that.
I like how you say we get like a definition of what the true source is. You mean the
Yeah.
male half of the power that drove the universe that turned the wheel of time? Oh yeah,
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 no,
got it.
totally clear
Yeah, true
definition, right?
source.
Yeah, now you know.
Now I
Now you
know.
know what's up. Well, I think the word that we land on, right, is the definition is like a power,
Mm, yeah.
And so when it says he's still touching, we can get this sense of like, oh, they can tap into this power that exists. Because I mean, there's a sort of agreement that I pick up a fantasy book, there's going to be some sort of magic in it somewhere, shape, or form, right? And I will say that unlike I think contrasting like this to George R. R. Martin, also as talking about like popularity of certain things is interesting because George R. R. Martin's story begins with things we're familiar with, like the cold and like meeting a zombie. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like George R. R. Martin's novels are actually very low magic. And
mm.
so when we consider that, that type of story has done really well, perhaps in part because of the low magic quality to it,
That's interesting.
and then you compare something like this where it's like magic in your face with crazy world terms right away. Whereas in something like Harry Potter, like we're literally getting witches and wizards right from the beginning. And it's talked about them doing witcher and wizard things that we can kind of get like, oh, that's a spell. Like that's terminology even most people just kind of know, even if they don't read fantasy. So I totally get that, here there's this hang up of like, what's the true source, what's Site in? But also that's what makes me as a fantasy reader geek out. It's like, oh, you made your whole fantasy thing. Like it's not just spells. Like there's a new name and there's a new way it works and there's a reason why it works this way and there's a male half. And so this is like, candy to me as a fantasy reader. Like I'm gobbling this up in excitement of what else has Robert Jordan figured out? What else can I experience that's magical in his world?
Nice.
But
So
I hear
like the
what you're
male
saying too.
half is promising you a female half, and you're like, okay, cool.
Exactly.
So there is more.
Right.
There is definitely
Right.
more than just this.
Exactly. And then that ties to
That's
sisters from
funny.
before. Because
Yeah.
remember, you were like, what's up with the sisters healing? And then we're like, oh, there's a male half. The male half is tainted, but there's a male guy who healed him and it was terrible. And then you've got these sisters who have better healing and there's this female half. So you can already be running with like starting to understand what happened before and running with questions of what's going to happen in the future.
That's so funny. Okay, yeah, no, you're opening my eyes, Jeff,
Cool.
to this
Cool.
world, to this world. Okay, let's talk about his like hyper guilt that he gets here. And
Sure.
again,
Yeah.
the guy's been crazy for the first half of it, but then he's healed, so he's no longer crazy. And like
Right.
I get that, I'm guessing he has led some sort of fight against an evil force
hmm Right.
of some sort.
Yeah.
And who I don't think is the Man in Black. It feels like Man in Black is just an emissary of
Right.
whatever evil force is. And
hmm
then so then the Man in Black's like saying, because you did that, that's why I killed everybody in this castle, or maybe evil force killed everybody in this
Oh,
castle. And then he's like, oh, you know what? You're right. It is my fault. And I'd be like, no, it's Man in Black's fault. It seems like he really
mm,
goes all the way to saying all slain by his hand. And I'm like,
right.
dude, no. Well, now again, I don't know, right? Because now also this like word
Mm,
kinslayer, I'm like,
right.
well, you know, so okay, so I think now after reading number three and talking to you, I am starting to put this crazy puzzle together that now I guess I'm supposed to believe that whatever happened, like all these people getting killed, he actually did it in his madness state or something.
Yeah.
Or something. I
Yeah.
don't know. But like even then, like is he realizing that? Is he realizing that he literally killed everyone? Because it reads to me like the evil force just
Mm,
killed everyone. And so, but then why would he say,
yeah.
I did it? Is it
Mm,
just like
yeah, no, I
is it just like
hear
he's
you.
guilty because he led the charge against this evil thing and then this evil thing killed all his family? Or did something happen even crazier where he literally did kill everybody in this castle?
Yeah, so okay. No, I hear you. Because again, to me, it's like, oh, I know what happened.
Right.
But I looking back through the exact lines of this part, I do see where that confusion could step in, and then his guilt could feel overblown or melodramatic,
Yeah.
or why he's not just shifting it to who should be the true party to blame, like the
Right.
Great Lord, that type of thing. So I think the key phrase is in what Alon is saying when he says. What hand slew Ilyena? Kinslayer, not mine, not mine. What hand struck down every life that bore a drop of your blood? Everyone you loved, not mine.
Right.
Everyone who loved you, everyone you loved, not mine. Kinslayer. And so I, and then in that sentence you highlighted, all slain by his hand. That's where the idea is that we're to get the connection that he did actually kill them in his
Wow.
state of
Wow.
madness.
And that just kind of
Yeah.
like that is what I'm talking about like my difficulty separating stuff that I would often
Right.
read as metaphorical
Hmm.
versus how much I'm supposed to be literal. Because when I read that the first time, like he's saying not mine, not mine, but he never says you did it, right? And then like he
Yeah.
said, but you led this charge against the evil
Hmm.
force and his counterstroke, right? Remember
Yeah.
his counterstroke, not you killed everyone, evil forces
Yeah.
counterstroke. So I'm thinking like he's feeling guilty that everybody died
Mm,
because he led this charge and that this is when he says all slain by his hand, he's speaking metaphorically. That was my honest to God first initial reading of
right.
this.
Right. It
That's
is that
wild.
counterstroke word is tricky, right? Because you could believe that, as you said, I think it's pretty clear that Lucer and Lid tried to attack the Great Lord, right?
Right.
It didn't work. There's this counterstroke. And then the question is, was the counterstroke just the Dark Lord killing everybody?
Right.
And so when Luz is blaming himself, he's blaming himself for attacking and the Great Lord
Right.
retaliating and killing everybody. Or is there more subject? Is there more meaning to that word counterstroke? And did he actually do it himself? I think I think we see again Jordan not wanting to just say it straight out, obviously, but also that's why I think there is this repetition of, for example, he remembered a cloudy memory like a dream of a dream, but he knew it true. In relationship to him being called
Mm, mm, mm,
Kinslayer,
mm, mm.
it says damned by his own hand. Again, I hear you that that could still be his hand of attacking the Great Lord, and then the countermeasure killed everyone he loves.
And then also
Um,
how everybody died
yeah,
was lightning and fire and walls melting. So like now
yeah,
I got to know even before Luz travels cuz I
right,
the traveling is the first time I have any idea that Luz can do anything magical whatsoever. And before I get that capitalized T in traveled, I need
Mm-hmm.
to now know that Luz killed everybody with lightning, fire, and melting the walls. That's wild, man.
Right, because right now you don't know that he's got the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Right, like right now he's just a dude
He's
in
just
his
a,
castle with
yeah.
everybody dead from some mysterious cause.
Hmm.
And it's not until he travels that you're aware that he's got some power too. I've got my copy here as well. I want to see if there was something earlier if Alon hinted at that they had been part of like the same group before then
Mm.
or something like that. Because we've seen
Mm.
Alon use power, but even then we haven't seen them do something on the scale of the destruction that happened in his home.
Yeah.
I would again say, though, that there is a hint at the end with what ends up happening
Yeah.
to lose Theron.
Right, right. I mean, obviously he's
And
got
we
crazy
do start
power.
to
He
see
makes like a lightning
maybe
bolt come down and basically just like
right,
uh
right,
what happens here? Like a mountain. He makes a mountain out of nothing or something where this
right.
lightning bolt hit or whatever.
Exactly. Exactly. And so it is I can see what you mean that at that moment we don't know if how he would have even done the way like what happened to his family. But I think in this moment we realize, oh wow, this dude does have crazy power. So when he was saying slain by my hand, he legit could have
Right.
done it while he was crazy in the mind twisting because his mind was twisted and crazy.
Well, that's why I'm kind of wondering whether, this whole prologue
Mhm.
is really. I wonder if Jordan's even aware of this, or Jordan already knows all these things, so he can just say it and it makes sense to him
Mhm.
as he's saying it, right? Um, but for me, like I couldn't make heads or tails of it. But then when you go back and reread it, now I'm feeling like kind of an idiot for like missing all these like hints of it. Though I still, I stand by that I didn't know. There was no reason for me to know Lewis had magic until after those sentences.
Sure.
And then when I'm past those
Absolutely.
sentences, I'm not thinking about those anymore. So
Mm,
I'm not
okay.
reflecting back. And so it makes me think this is really meant to be reread, that it almost works better from a point of view of sense and narrative when you go back, maybe much later than when I reread it. Maybe even rereading it
Mhm.
immediately after isn't going to help you. But if
Right.
go through the whole book and you go back and reread it, you're like, okay, now this all clicks. And,
Right.
the other thing about it, though, is that you don't write the thing that's effective about this is
Mhm.
that it's bonkers. Is that like
Right.
the energy of this little prologue is like off the charts, especially compared to the sheep shearing festival or whatever the heck I was reading in that earlier part. It's like wild. It's definitely got
Mhm.
energy and excitement and
Right.
craziness and apocalypse and just like everything, right? And maybe that's all it has to do. Like maybe I just need to,
Yeah.
as long as it doesn't turn me off, if I
Mhm.
hit this, that's gonna supply the energy to keep me going through, all the kind of slower introductory, unfolding
Right.
stuff that kind of comes in the next chapter,
Right. Well, and that's why I think it is a very traditional prologue in a way, like even traditional to comparison to beginnings of movies, that it's like big, crazy explosions, and it's making these huge promises that there is massive power that people can wield. And we're going to get back to this, that we're going to return. But what I think is really cool about the first chapter, the traditional first chapter, um, is how it does even still connect some to this prologue. It does very much turn to, back to now things are quiet and slow, or I shouldn't say back to for someone reading the original prologue into chapter one, it just becomes quiet and slow. But even within that, there's some connections. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to talk through you with this because these are things that I've learned to do as a fantasy reader over decades, and I just take them completely for granted. But yeah, I think a lot of fantasy reading, at least in this style, is you going back and checking, or you just saying, you know what, I'm going to power through it. There was some crazy stuff. I'll understand it later, depending on what sort of reader you are, I suppose.
All right, man. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm excited to get into the rest, and I think what we'll do is we'll cut it here. We'll pick up with chapter numero uno, the real chapter numero uno, in the next video. But thanks for joining us, and we'll have that next video up very, very soon. I think.
Sounds
Jeff,
good to me
thanks so
too.
much. This was super fun.
Yeah, no, this was definitely gave me a different perspective on it as well. So I really enjoyed doing this, and I hope it's the same for people that are listening or watching.
All
Thanks for
right,
being here.
bro. I'll see you next time.
See you then.